Now that we have the reset button and our data transformation chop in place, what we're going to do is start to develop out the control mechanisms for our camera. And to do that, we're actually going to use a slider, but in a novel way. We're going to use a slider to allow us to add and subtract to numbers as we go along. First thing we're going to add is our base slider, and I'm going to call this xpos. And I am going to make this tall rather than long, so I'm going to make it about 200 by 40. And inside of it, I'm going to change the knob to be the same. So I'm going to copy its x parameter and paste it into its y. And anytime it says u, I'm going to make it say v. And anytime it says width, I'm going to make it say height. Panel width, panel height. I'm going to then change this around, so I'm going to make it around 10 tall, but make it the width of the parent. I now have a horizontal bar. You'll notice that it still registers me sliding from left to right, and that's because the panel is set up to be U. What we want to do is make that V. Now I can drag it up and down. I get 1 at the top and 0 at the bottom. I'm going to come up one level and then have a look at what's coming out of the actual slider. If we have a look at a null, we'll see that it goes from being 1 to 0. But we are going to make use of the speed chop. And the way that the speed chop works is it stores a number and then adds whatever is coming into it as a constant. So on 0, speed equals 0. But if I increase by 0.48, we can see that the number in the speed is increasing by 0.48 every second until I go back down to 0, where it holds whatever value it's at. I can reset it to set it back to 0, or if I had a negative number, I could actually negate that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to remove this null, and I'm going to insert a maths. And the maths is simply going to let me range from 0 to 1 to -1 to 1. That means that when at the top, I'll increase the number, when at the bottom, I'll decrease the number, but when I'm dead in the center, it should, in theory, hold the number steady. But it's almost impossible for me to place this slider dead on the 0, 0 spot. So what we actually want to happen is have a spring back effect, so that I can drag up to increase the number, drag down to decrease it, but anytime I'm not clicking the mouse, then this will automatically go back to its center point. To do that, we need to use the panel execute inside of the slider itself. So to do that, we're going to go back inside of our slider and have a look at our panel. If I show the select channel, we can see that when I'm clicking the slider, it's 1, and when I'm not clicking the slider, it's 0. So we want to make use of this effect to make sure that we spring the panel back to its default location whenever the select is 0. If we use chops, we would need to use something called the click mechanic for the slider container. But that will cause an infinite loop of, if I click the center, this says it's being clicked, which then says it's unclicked, which would then move it back to the center by clicking it. So it would be an infinite clicking loop. Instead, we're going to use a panel dat. And in here, we're going to do off to on, and its panel value is going to be select. I'm going to delete everything apart from the off to on. And in here, we're going to add a piece of code that tells it that whenever the panel select goes from 1 to 0 or on to off, we want to execute. And that piece of code is going to tell it to make our panel value of V go back to 0.5. So the command is, we're going to tell our parent, which is the slider, to set its panel V value to be equal to 0.5. So now hopefully when I click and move, we can see it instantly snaps back to being 0.5. And thanks to the maths we have outside, 0.5 on our slider from 0 to 1 equals dead in the center, which means that when it's here, this will not move at all. I can increase it or I can decrease it, and anytime I let go, it will snap back to the dead center. Now that we've done that and we confirmed the maths works, I'm going to cut that and paste it inside. And then I'm going to change the name of our output. Instead of V1, parent channel.name. Turn it into an executable. So now it's going to take the name of the container of the slider and use that to drive the parameter that we see outside. In this case, it's going to be xpos. So now we have a speed value that is x position that I can increase or decrease. What I can't do yet is reset it. So let's add this xpos to our merge. I'm going to make our x position. So I'm going to say if channel.name is equal to xpos, then I want to set data.par.value 0 equal to value. So anytime that the channel name of x position changes, then set whatever the value is changed to be our chop. And instead of resetting this to 0, what I want to do is reset my speed every time the user resets the camera. So instead of this, I'm going to say operator xpos underscore speed dot par dot reset pulse dot pulse, and I'm going to change the speed to be called xpos underscore speed. So the hope is now that when I increment it, we can see the camera actually moves right and left, and when I reset it, it snaps back to the 0 point on the x-axis. I'm going to introduce text to the background as well. So I'm going to add a text top, remove all of its values, and then I'm going to use a dat to drive it, a plain text dat, so that I can have vertical text. And here I'm going to write exactly what I want, which is xpos. I'm going to drag and drop it on top, link it. I'm going to change the name of my text to be bg. And then in my slider panel look, I'm going to say go and get .bg from inside of yourself and change the fill top to be height. And now we should have a nicely formatted title for our X position. The next thing I want to do is be able to visualize the value that the projector is currently at. In the final 3D viewer that we build, it won't have measurements, but if we visualize it, it means that users can place projectors exactly where they need to be. I also want them to be able to do it very specifically without the sliders on initial setup. So I'm going to introduce a field. I'm actually going to move this slider and the field down into its own container called xpos1. I'm going to make it the same, 200 pixels tall. But now I'm going to add, say, 25 for our field. So I'm going to make it 225 and keep the 40 width. Now if I copy both of them, inside, I'm going to add an out chop for my slider. And I'm going to call my field xpos underscore field. I'm going to change it to be 40 wide and 25 tall. And I'm also going to move it to be at the very top of our slider. So I'm going to move it to 200. Inside of it, let's clean up the text slightly. So I'm going to horizontally align it by center. And I'm going to need to change the value that's inside field every time the user updates their number. So with the field in place, what we want to do is every time the value changes inside our speed, we want to come down and set the value inside of our field. So I'm going to scroll up one level, reconnect our out, and I'm going to have a look at our chop execute data. So in the same line where we're saying set the projector value in our transform data to be val, what I also want to do is I want to set the value of my field to be my value as well. So I'm going to say operator xpos1 / xpos underscore field / xpos underscore field / string, and string is a table 00. Its first cell we want to be equal to val as well. So now when I move, we can see that our value is changing inside here, and I can still reset it to 0. The only problem now is that it has about 9 decimal points. So we want to remove them using Python before we set this value. So to stop the crazy decimal places, all I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the round function and then do value comma 2, which says round the value to 2 decimal points. And now if we have a look, we can see that we have our value that is changing, but we're only seeing a sensible number. And 3 values and a point fit in here really nicely. And I can still reset it all to 0. However, I want users to be able to make use of the input function here. So if I write 10, nothing happens, and that's because if we go back inside of our slider, our field isn't actually hooked up to anything. But we need to be really careful that we don't create a lot of loops here, because we have our slider connecting to our chop execute. We don't want to just plug our X position field in there as well. We want to keep them in a perfect loop. So what I'm going to do is every time that the user changes the value inside the X position field, I'm going to update the value inside the speed by setting its reset position. If I set to 0.5, it goes to 0.5, and then I'm able to add or remove from it. What I can't do then though is reset it, because this value is now something other than 0. So I'm going to hard link this value here to this chop here. So I'm going to say the reset value is equal to operator xpos1 / xpos underscore field / string 0, 0. So now when the user sets a value, we can see it updates 10, 0.2. And all I need to do is trigger the reset to happen whenever the user has finished typing. And we can do that by using this section here, the panel execute. The same way that we reset the button, we can also reset the field. So if I click it, we can see that it's now focused. If I click away, it's no longer focused. So it's impossible for me to be changing the number in our field and focus to be anything but 1. But whenever I finish typing and push enter, click away, return, tab, whatever, focus becomes 0 again. So if I insert a chop execute and make it work on channel focus, when it goes from on to off, so we'll delete all of that and we'll delete all of that. What I need to say is that when it goes from being on to off, to reset the speed again, which will then pulse the message through our chain and update our projector position. So I'm going to say operator, up 1 level, up 2 levels, xpos underscore speed dot par dot reset pulse dot pulse. And now hopefully I should be able to set the value, push return, and our projector will actually move to that location. In addition, I'll now also be able to update its current position using the slider, thanks to the benefit of a speed. The one thing that doesn't happen now is reset does not work, because our speed is on an expression value, whereas we need to reset this expression value to be 0. So to do that, in our chop execute, when the user pushes the reset button, rather than actually doing anything to the position of the projector at all we're going to do is reset the value of this to 0. That will cause focus to be gained and then lost, which will then pulse this, which will set its reset value to 0, and then pulse the chain through so that it updates here. So instead of this, what I'm going to say is, I'm going to say operator xpos / xpos underscore field / string 0, 0 is equal to 0, xpos1 / xpos. So now it resets to 0, but our projector doesn't move. So we will need to add a line of code that tells our string to go and reset again. So operator xpos underscore speed dot power dot reset pulse dot pulse. Click away and push the reset button, and now it quickly snaps to the center. Our value shows as 0. We can move it left and right, we can set its value, and we can still reset it. So now we have a completely functioning slider for our X position.